welcome to the sales meeting this Tuesday, following Labor Day. We did a virtual, so you guys that are recovering from your long Labor Day holiday could stay in your jammies and watch the events happen. But no, it's important we get back to work. We got a lot of stuff to cover, and we got a lot of things going on in our industry, as you know, with the settlement and stuff like that. And then, just a couple questions and things that we've seen over Facebook and stuff that we want to answer or discuss. And then we're going to end the sales meeting with a podcast. If you don't know, Nevada Realtors has started putting out a podcast covering events and stuff like that. And we wanted to play episode number 2, which is where myself and Tiffany, the CEO, interview a gentleman by the name of James Dwiggins. And he's the CEO of Next Home. But there's some great conversation on the settlement and how things are happening, how other companies are handling things as well. And so stay tuned after me and Chris do our brief little dance here. We'll play that, and I think it's good information. And then if you like it, please like and subscribe the Nevada Realtors podcast, which is Nevada Realtors Today. So, Chris, how was your Labor Day?
It was fantastic. I had a great time. Could use the rest and relaxation. So a couple of points that we have that came up that are just constant. We get the questions. So number one, we've had several clients and several agents say the law has changed with these new regulations. And I just want to point out, this is not a new law. This is nothing more than a legal settlement. Could it affect the law down the road? Yes. Could it be with the consideration of the DOJ? Yes, but this is not a new law. It's just a settlement. And so like any other lawsuit, make sure that you're educating your clients on what that means and how it really applies.
And good point. It's the education process. And this is one of the reasons I do like this settlement, is it gives us an opportunity to become more professional on presenting things to the consumer and them understanding exactly what you do to earn your fee. If you're going around with that buyer agency agreement and saying, hey, this law, I need you to sign this, or you need to sign this so I can show you a house, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got to step back, set an appointment, sit down with them, give them buyer's consultation, work through the process. When you demonstrate your value, they should have no problem signing that agreement for your fee. And I know you've had a couple instances just this past week where you've worked with a buyer. I mean, how did that go?
Actually, believe it or not, this last month I've signed 3 buyer broker agreements under the new regulation. Every one of those meetings has taken 20 to 30 minutes, and 2 out of the 3 clients had not really heard of any changes that were going on. And so I was able to use the supplemental that we talked about. I put it in front of them. I said, the new guidelines of this settlement, not the law, say that I'm supposed to provide you with this information. And before I take you out and show you any property, which has always been my standard of practice, I need to present to you what I'm going to do and the fee that I charge.
Right.
And the conversations went really well. I think the clients kind of appreciated the fact that we expanded on the information, that we knew what was going on. It does make the agent look like the intelligent part of the conversation, because you're providing them with information that they don't know about, and you're supporting it with documentation. So it feels really secure that they're making the right decision. So those meetings went well. Now I just got to sell them something expensive.
Yeah, it helps.
Number 2 that came up in this, and everyone seems to know this, but there's been some back and forth. This settlement doesn't apply to non-realtors. So everyone who is a member of the Board of Realtors that's interacting with the forms and the MLS system, that's who it applies to. So there's many commercial practitioners that may be affiliates of the boards, but they're not actually realtor members, so it wouldn't apply to them. And then all those licensees that you see out there, we have about, I think it's something like 4,000 licensees additional in Southern Nevada that are not realtor members. It might even be more than that now, I don't remember. But none of this would apply to any of those groups that hold a license, or anyone sitting in a referral company, or those kind of things.
So that affects a lot of other states more than ours, because a lot of other states have realtor and non-realtor members that are actually out there selling a lot more than here. A lot of what we see here, what seems to be customary in our market, is mostly the people that aren't a member of the board or non-realtor status, or kind of what we call referral status. Yeah. So they're referring stuff out. So, but just know, if it's a real estate agent that's not a member of the board, they don't have to abide by this. This is a realtor-specific settlement. And some of the benefits of being a realtor, number one, is on the 17th, if you remember, you're covered in this settlement.
Yes,
and they are not. So that aren't. So
And I've heard the scuttle out there, like, why am I a realtor? You don't have to be a realtor member and to participate in the MLS. You can actually participate in the MLS, subscribe to that service. It's the same cost to be a member and subscribe or not to be a member and subscribe, but the membership is a choice. All brokers decide on what they want their offices to be and how they want it to be set up. And so here at Signature, our agents are realtor members. But there are opportunities for referral program companies and things like that, but it just doesn't make sense, in my opinion, for my business.
there's
But
there's
there
too
is.
many benefits to be
There's
a
too many
realtor.
benefits.
So
Number
which is a whole nother show.
a whole nother show. Number three, the vacant land purchase agreement has been updated to mirror the RPA, which is funny because land is not included in this settlement. But just to make things consistent, just to make the process easy. And I was actually able to utilize that purchase agreement on a land listing I had where I represented both sides. I presented to the buyer, one of the BBAs we were talking about, what I charge. And I presented to the seller who asked the question, I heard the law says I don't have to pay you. And I said, well, that's not what our contract says. And it's not a law. It was just a settlement. Parties were able to come together and we made that deal work. But just want to let you know that's been updated.
Yeah, and good point that it's not covered under the settlement, but with no offers of compensation in the MLS, this allows you to still ask for it, which I think is not a bad
Consistency
thing.
is important.
There you go. Consistency.
Number four, across the board, we've seen agents get buyer broker agreements signed, get listing agreements signed at a value that some is higher than what they charged before. They've reevaluated their service and their sales system, and now they've increased their value. We just had a scenario where an agent was able to take a $1 million listing at a higher commission rate than they used to charge. They're providing a great service. The client saw the value in it and paid it. And we've got examples of that all over, but sales are still happening. Business is still happening. And actually things look like they might be picking up a little bit with the change in interest rates and everything else. So sellers and buyers are still paying for value.
Yeah, dollars follow value. If you can demonstrate value, they will pay for it.
They will. All right, number 5 in Chris's hot point list, we have the new showing agreement that we rolled out. And I want to thank Trish Delaney for pointing this out. But in the agreement, it doesn't actually say when the agent will be paid, but it does describe the service that I'm providing as a showing agent as I'm just showing you property. I'm not negotiating a lease. I'm not submitting your documentation. I'm not filling out your application. I'm not negotiating with the management company. All of those things are the client's role and responsibility. Your only job, and the reason why it's a separate agreement than the BBA, your only job is to find and locate properties for them to apply for. And so technically, once you've done that, you've earned the commission rate or whatever you're charging in that. Your standard of practice as an agent, and this is what I would explain to my client or consumer, is that I only get paid in my standard of practice when you locate that property and when you're bringing in your monies and deposits to do that. Now, we've seen some other scenarios where agents are charging for that service in a cashier's check up front. They're having to hold that check. They can't cash it. They can't do anything with it, but they're holding that check until the client locates a property. And then they're exchanging that check for a different check. That's a lot of work, but technically, that is a process that could go through for their standard of practice. But it's just the point that agreement is just about you showing them homes, and technically at that point you've earned the fee for the service.
Yeah, and what I'd like to see is getting into a standard of practice where once they make application, they pay you the fee.
Yeah.
Right. So now they've submitted their application. You've done what you've committed to do in the process. And the other thing is to when they're taking that check up front, it's important to understand we're not cashing that because it's not a retainer fee. Retainers in the state of Nevada it's handled very differently, and we're not set up to do it. It's a separate trust account and all kinds of stuff, and you have to do separate billing and all that. And it's a lot of work for a little bit of money and a lot of liability. So we're not doing that. So understand, we're not taking retainers. We're not signing retainer agreements. We have a one-page tenant agreement to show property.
And you're right. I mean, every time we've seen a retainer conversation come up, the real estate division and the commissioners have not looked very favorably on it, because when you pay somebody for a service up front, there's things that may or may not happen through the course of that deal. And that's what their problem is with that process. And so down the road, we could see that change. We could see a lot of things change. We could see an hourly rate and see things change. But right now, we're staying away from it. Number 6 on Chris's 7 hot point list, You can't market what you haven't supported by the listing agreement. And so we're still seeing agents in the marketplace marketing co-ops with a new listing agreement that doesn't allow for a co-op. You can't do that because you're responsible for everything that you put out there. And so the point is, I know it's a change, I know it's a mindset difference, but it's not your responsibility anymore as a listing agent to guarantee a co-op to any buyer's agent. The only thing you should be doing is telling your sellers that when an offer comes forward, that they're probably going to ask for some type of compensation. I'm going to provide you a net sheet showing you what the net of the offer is. That's when you talk to the client about what the co-op is. It's the buyer's agent responsibility to notify their buyer of what they charge for the service and then decide when they write the offer what they're going to ask for.
Correct. And I think you prep your seller for the that this compensation is going to be asked for, and at that time you're going to work off the net and show them how what they get from that. But I think the quicker we all get into our head that offers of compensation is dead,
Mhm.
the better. And that sounds scary, so to speak. But what that means is that no longer is commissions going to be paid from broker to broker. The commissions are being paid from the seller to the buyer's broker on the buyer's behalf, or they're being paid by the buyer to the buyer's broker. So we're taking out the listing broker out of this equation, and that's where the offers of compensation no longer exist.
And there is negotiation happening right now on that compensation, just like anything in the contract. And remember, the premise of the lawsuit was that everything is negotiable. And so, yes, there is a scenario where you, as the buyer's agent, may have your commission being negotiated, but that was the point of selling your buyer on why they're paying for the service to begin with. You're just trying to offset the cost. And so, yeah, there's a scenario where that buyer may be writing a check through escrow to cover your commission. And why shouldn't they? I mean, you provide a great service that provides them with great value. I hear all the time agents saying, I saved my client this and I helped them find that. And this deal wouldn't have come together without this happening. That's what they're paying for. There's one other thing about the commission structure I want to point out that's kind of concerning. If you did pre negotiate a co op, let's just say for sake of conversation, let's say it's 2%, and that buyer's agent had an agreement with their buyer at 1%, I can't guarantee the ethics and standard of the other agent. I know how our agents are. I know how I am. I know how we teach agents at this company to be, but I can't guarantee their business practice. And so there is a scenario there where I could be costing my client more money because of the ethics of the other agent. Who knows if they changed their agreement? Who knows if they did something different? But that's the point. Just stay out of it. You won't have those problems anyway.
Yeah, and good point is you won't know, and it's not your job to ask for the buyer broker agreement, and it's not your job to enforce it. So if you're not advertising that offer of compensation, they're going to ask for what's in their agreement, and that's where it's going to stay.
The last point is one that probably has been the context of every one of these conversations we've had, of every town hall we've been on. Things are going to change. Things are going to progress. Our standards of practice will change. The paperwork will change. Right now, we're seeing some other agreements that are not board related. They're provided by different brokers. They're provided by different attorneys in the business. They're provided by clients. The whole point of it is that agents need to be cognizant that it is their responsibility to review all of the documents that come through the transaction and advise the buyer and seller on things that they should be looking at. If you see a contract, just don't take for granted that that contract is a board form or a company document. Make sure that you're reading through it. I've seen a couple that mirror those documents, but they have different clauses. We're going to see different groups within our industry come out with new listing agreements, possibly new BBAs that come out. So it's just important that you're reading that. And if you have questions on any of it, please engage one of the leaders here at Signature so that we can help you through it. Brandon and I seem to be lucky enough to keep reviewing these random documents that fly around, but just know that if something is a good document that we think is of value to you, we're definitely going to let you know and add it.
Yeah, and this does not give you permission to go create documents. This does not give you permissions to find some that you like or whatever. We have approved documents that we're going to use by this brokerage that cover our butts and liability and stuff that have been approved. So it's important. So a reminder, we're not using the LVR buyer broker agreement. We have a one pager. And if there's any more that come out that we're okay with, we'll add those to the library. But right now, we just have a few concerns with the LVR one, and so we're not endorsing or using that or signing that at this brokerage. So please use the one pager. Besides that, it's easier, right?
It is. It is. It's so much easier to present a one-page document. The one thing I've gotten back from feedback from buyers is that, they really don't know in some cases the whole process or what this all means. And so the scarier the process is, the less that you say with just putting stuff in front of them can kind of spook the buyer a little bit. And so that's why it's so important that you have these buyer presentations and these meetings to actually discuss it with them.
Yeah. And so any other points? That's 7.
That's 7.
That's 7. Great. So we're going to send you off to the podcast done by Tiffany Banks and myself with this James Wiggins. And I'll tell you, I hope you stick around and watch it because I really enjoyed doing this podcast and talking to this gentleman. There's a lot of good information. And the good news is one day, someday, not too far in the future, we'll have a sales meeting where we don't talk about the settlement.
Yeah.
Love the fact that the seller's agent isn't dictating my compensation, that I'm sitting down now with a buyer rep agreement, a consult, my services, my product offering, and curating an experience for them around what they want and what I provide. And I guarantee you this, good agents will charge more, and agents who can't articulate value will charge less.
Welcome back to Nevada Realtors Today, your place for timely updates on the news and trends that matter to realtors in the Silver State. Now let's join your Nevada Realtors President, Brandon Roberts, and Nevada Realtors CEO, Tiffany Banks, for today's episode of Nevada Realtors Today.
So good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Tiffany Banks and I'm the CEO for the Nevada Realtors. And we have Brandon Roberts, our Nevada Realtors State President, with us. We are so thrilled to have James Wiggins here with us today. He's a serial entrepreneur, speaker, podcaster, and the CEO of Next Home. James is highly sought after and very much in demand on the national stage for his straightforward and honest conversation, which we look forward to having with you today. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thanks, James. So before we get started, can we just please, and I know you'll say I don't need to bore them with myself, but please tell our listeners just a little bit about you.
My background is third generation in residential real estate. My grandfather started his company in 1967. Both my parents and grandparents were in the business. So I started with them when I was about 18, started a couple of prop tech companies as well in my 20s. Got involved in the franchising side of the business in 2006, and then started my current company, Next Home, in 2014, which is a national franchise with about 600 offices and about 6,000 agents. So I have been in the business for a very long time and on multiple positions. So it's been exciting. And then obviously a lot of change coming into the industry. So I know we'll talk about a lot of that today too.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's go right into it. What if there's one thing you want our listeners to know at this very moment? What is that?
Look, it's obviously a very scary time, and people are trying to figure out what to do in this new world. We've had a lot of litigation. There's still ongoing litigation. There's a lot of changes coming around. There's a lot of people trying to figure out how to move forward. A lot of people trying to hold on to the past. And I think I would tell you that one of the most important parts to keep in mind is a lot of opportunity. So whenever there's change like this, you can look at it from two perspectives of, how do we continue to do things we've been always doing? And then how do we move forward into this new realm? And I think that, a lot of these changes, while scary, some of them are actually going to be very good for agents that are focused on how to make their consumer experience better. And how do you make this thing so it's clear and more understandable for the buyer and seller? You have to remember this, that one of the most important parts about what we do is shepherding somebody through a transaction they're going to do maybe 2 or 3 times in their life. They're not waking up and wanting to do this on their own. They're not like going, hey, I want to sell my house on my own today. They're looking for somebody to help them with that process. So in that understanding, you have to go, what do I need to change in my business? What do I need to adapt to? And then how can we increase our value to show consumers what we do and have them obviously pay what we're worth? And we'll talk a lot about that today, but I'm looking at this as an opportunity to make the industry better. So.
And when you think about making the industry better, there's a lot of scared agents though. And I know as far as our membership goes, we've had, I mean, obviously for those of us that have been prepping, knowing August 17th was coming, it came and went, and the world is still, it is what it is. But there's a lot of scared agents of not knowing how to navigate this new world. Who do they go to for if they don't have a solid broker to lean on? Like, do they listen to a podcast? Do they, like, what do they do?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of information out there. Some of it's accurate, some of it's not. So I'm sure it's confusing. I would tell everyone to try to look at multiple sources and then look and see what makes sense to you. And also think about things from being in your buyer or seller's shoes. Like, just logically look at stuff and go, is this contract fair to them? Is it understandable? Does it make sense? Is it confusing? How are they when you ask them to pay your fee? Are you explaining to them how that's something that you can potentially have the seller pay? Like, you need to be thinking about the process of, as these changes come down, what are you doing to help them understand exactly what it is that you're having them sign, the experience of the real estate transaction, how compensation is taken care of, how many days it takes to get them into contract. Like, it's just constantly putting yourself in the consumer perspective, I think, is the most important part. So much of what we're doing is coming from this defensive spot of trying to keep things the way that they are. And we have to stop doing that. We have to think about how this new process is, because here's the thing. The Department of Justice has been very clear about what they're trying to do. If you haven't read any of these arguments, they want to see commissions decoupled. They're absolutely focused on that path. Plaintiffs' lawyers, exactly the same thing. They want to see a world where the buyer's agent is paid by the buyer and the seller's agent is paid by the seller. That's fundamentally what it is. How we get there is what we're going to be talking a lot about today in the process. But when you think about that decoupling part, the buyer's going, well, I can't afford to pay you. So you have to walk them through that experience. You can talk about how the seller can pay a concession. You can talk about how the seller can pay the buyer's agent's fee through the closing, but you need to educate them on that process. The more education you can get from your association, from your MLS, from industry leaders, reading stuff on the news, you're going to be able to figure out this path. And then obviously today we'll talk about a lot of those details and we'll help people get there too. So.
Thanks, James. Brandon?
Yeah, James, first, thanks for taking the time. When Tiffany told me you were going to be a guest, I was super excited. I've been listening to some of your stuff out there, and I really enjoy listening to your opinion on things and the way it is. And I think you've been as calling it how it is long before it even happened. So, but we're getting a lot of questions about the best way to articulate value as a buyer's agent from the onset. And I've been training my agents that a solid buyer's presentation is kind of key. What are your thoughts on the best way to sit down with a buyer early on and what to say?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing you need to do is treat your buyer exactly the way you treat your seller. Like, you're not going to go sit down with a seller and hand him a listing agreement and just say sign. Like, that's just not how it works. You're going to do a consult. You're going to talk to them about the products and services you offer. You're going to talk about your value, what the transaction timeline is going to be, how properties are selling, price points. You're going to go through this whole presentation. And the current system that we haven't set it up that way. If you think about the way the current system's been, we haven't sat down and done buyer consults in a long time. And a buyer deserves that. They need to explain to them what this is and the process and the work that's involved and how all this stuff comes together. So again, you're going to hear me talk about this a lot. I think this is an incredible opportunity to level up. So when I say treat your buyer the same way you treat your seller, you should have a consult. I agree with you on that, Brandon. It's a presentation. But it needs to go deeper than that. It's not just, here's what I do, here's my Rolodex, here's the amount of time. It's also, what products and services are you offering that buyer to help make that experience better? So for all the listeners that are on here, this is something that you should be doing right now. And I'm going to give you literally verbatim of how we've trained all of our people in this process. We have a beautiful buyer presentation. If you don't have one, there's Core Present, there's Touch CMA, there's Cloud CMA, there's tons of products out there to create a really gorgeous presentation. Get comfortable with that. Get good at explaining what those things are that you do. Get good at explaining the process, the market, etc. The second thing you need to do is you need to show them how you're going to make their life more convenient. So here's some of the things that we're doing. Number one is, second most requested thing by buyers is floor plans. One of the things that most listing agents don't do, provide floor plans. Like, it drives me completely insane. So I'm looking at property all the time. I'm looking at the photos. I don't have any context on how the house is set up. I don't understand how everything's put together. I don't know where the rooms are. Floor plans are essential. So there's a great product called Kubicasa, and you guys can all write this down. It's free. It doesn't cost any money. You can go get Kubicasa. You can literally create a floor plan in 5 minutes. It's a beautiful app on your phone. You walk through the house. It uses LiDAR. It goes through this process. In 24 hours, you can have a floor plan. What we're doing, as an example, is we tell the buyer, if there's a house that you like that doesn't have a floor plan, let me know. I'll go create a floor plan for you on the property so that you can have context to how this property is designed, how it's laid out, so you don't have to spend a bunch of time going there and touring a home you may not like. This is added value. This is increasing the value proposition. So there's number one. Number two, Front Door. Great product. They have an app you can download. You give it to the buyer at the closing and tell them, look, when you own this house, if you have any issues for the first year, pull up your app on Front Door. It's branded to me, and you can get a handyman on the line, and they'll teach you how to use the thermostat. And if there's a problem with the water heater, they'll help diagnose. You don't have to spend any money bringing somebody out. You'll be able to have somebody work with you on these things to understand the features of the home. It's an added value. Home warranty, we all know. We used to do that a lot where we provided it. Look at incorporating that again. Revive Remodel. There's a lot of companies that will give you the ability to look at a property. They'll give you a quote on how much money it would cost to remodel it, and then what the up leg is on value. Every single property that a buyer's looking to purchase, you should be able to give them an analysis on, here's the current state. If you invested $50,000, it could be worth $200,000 more. That's part of their equation on buying a house. All of this is services that I'm adding on top as a buyer's agent that increase my value over somebody else. Because what most buyer's agents are going to do is they're going to go, here's what I do, and here's my people, and then here's all this work that I do, and I'm going to show you properties, and I'm going to write a contract, and it sounds great, but if you think about it, it's like, yeah, okay, like how much is that worth versus here's all the extra things that I do on top of that. I can 100% tell you when you approach a buyer that way, it's much easier to ask for the compensation and receive it because you are showing tons of value. That's just some examples. Two others. Great product like homeowner.ai. When the client moves into the property, you got them this house. Now give them a system that they can actually manage the asset. It'll tell them when they need to change their air filters, when you need to get the water heater service. Like, make it so it's not just this timeline of 30 to 90 days when you work with them, but now over the course of home ownership of that property, you're front and center on that experience. That's what we have to be doing. The second thing is sort of related to this. You should be thinking about, I'm going to say something controversial, but it wouldn't be me if I didn't. You should be thinking about levels of service. I want everyone to chew on that for a minute. If I've bought multiple houses in the past, I don't need the same level of service as a first-time home buyer. Let's just call a spade a spade. I understand the process. I'm looking for you to help me find a house, but really handle the paperwork. I think it's smart to create potentially tiers. And it may be that your base tier is just what you do, but you could have a tier for people who have purchased homes in the past who just need a little less work and just more of the paperwork side, bringing stuff together. You could have your standard tier, which is, I do 80 hours worth of work. This is the services I provide. I'm going to do 15 showings. You create that. And then here's my point. You could have the Ritz-Carlton tier. So that tier is elevated service. So I'm going to rag on my co-host of my podcast because I can, and he loves me and I love him. He is a brilliant, amazing human being and one of the laziest people I know. And I say that as respectfully as possible. He's the guy that paid a premium when he bought his house to have the agent deal with packers coming to pack up all of his stuff, people unpacking all of this stuff into his house. He had a freaking person come by that organized the kitchen in the most logical way, where your pots and pans and all your stuff's supposed to be, based upon whether you're right-handed, left-handed, who cooks, who doesn't. The point is, you could create an experience where not only will I help you get the house, I'm going to get you out of the current house into the new house through all of my partners. You mark that up a little bit for the coordination of that service. Landscaper will come take care of it. I've got the gardener. I've got everything all dialed so that you can just write a check and I take care of everything. And I think that's a missed opportunity we're not thinking about. And the reason I say that is two reasons. Number one is people are willing to pay a premium for convenience and service in this country. The greatest example of it is DoorDash. We are lazy as hell that we're willing to spend more money to have the food delivered than the cost of the food itself because it's convenient for us. People want that. Number two is a really interesting stat that I love. So in 1960, dual income households in the United States was around 30%, where mom and dad both worked in order to make a living. Today, it's almost 60. Like really, like let that sink in. 60% of Americans have to have a dual income household to make a living in this country. Nobody wakes up and goes, I just want to sell my house on my own, or I just want to buy a house on my own. They want someone to help them with this process. You just have to articulate value. That's the key to this whole thing. So when I talked about opportunity earlier, I love the fact that the seller's agent isn't dictating my compensation, that I'm sitting down now with a buyer rep agreement, a consult, my services, my product offering, and curating an experience for them around what they want and what I provide. And I guarantee you this, good agents will charge more, and agents who can't articulate value will charge less. That's what we're going to see in this new world. So I'll stop there before I keep going.
No, and I actually love that, because we always say there's the right house for the right buyer, right? And I think there's the right level of service for that buyer as well. And I think being able to understand that every seller is different, right? Every buyer, you think about the luxury market, first-time home buyer, somebody that has a legal background and maybe, doesn't need the level of help, or maybe they even need more help because they've never read a real estate contract. And I think so you're actually looking at the consumer, which is exactly what we're supposed to be doing, right? In this new wave of being as transparent as we can, and showing what your value is and getting them to where they need to be, which at the end of the day, seller wants what? Like net the most money they possibly can for their house. Or we're going to go into talking about that a little bit. And then buyer wants to feel like, they've moved into their dream home. And a lot of times they just want to envision their kids playing in the front yard or something else, and not all the logistics that go into everything that you all do.
That section I'm going to replay and listen to over and over again, and I am going to encourage agents to do the same thing, because laid out a good blueprint on establishing value, and money follows value. And so I think it's important that that you, not only in your presentation, you're selling yourself and your value and how you're going to help them through that process. James, you said something you said was controversy. You said something that you said was controversial about the different tiers, but I think that's genius, because I think that helps us in the lawsuits as well, because it's actually now buyers are actually paying for something that they're agreeing to, rather than just a blanket percentage.
Correct. The idea of an agent that is brand new getting paid exactly the same as an agent who's been in the business for 20 years doesn't make logical sense. And you could argue that you're doing that as an incentive to bring buyers in, but the reality is, in this new model, an agent who's good at what they do is going to garner a rate that they're worth and that the buyer will agree to, and an agent who's new will probably have to learn how to do that over the course of time. That is a free market that's designed to be that way. And so I'll lead this into another piece of this conversation, in that that's gonna allow good agents to stand out, and agents that are not providing as much service are gonna differentiate themselves up or down. And you're gonna have buyers search for agents based upon service. They're gonna compare you now. That's where we're moving towards, is these buyer rep agreements. It's kind of gonna be the new frontier. If you think about it, how your buyer rep agreement is created. Is it exclusive? What's the clause for the client to leave if they don't want to continue the relationship? How complicated is it to understand? That's all going to be part of this process. But to me, your buyer rep agreement needs to be incorporated into this consult. It should be sitting with that client, articulating value, and then talking about what your fee is in that process. So I'm going to lead that down a second path. The conversation now, and this is sort of buyer scripting, needs to be about how the buyer is going to be able to pay for your services. And this is the fear, because the media is doing a fantastic job of putting complete utter nonsense out for people to read, saying now that buyers are going to have to pay their agent, which isn't necessarily the case. We all know that. So there's really a couple different ways that this works. The buyer can agree to pay the buyer's agent if they have the funds to do so. We know that's going to be a small percentage of buyers in the market. Number two is you'll be able to structure it so that the seller pays the buyer agent directly through the purchase contract, so through the agreement and through the closing process. Number three is you can have the seller offer a concession to the buyer for closing costs. Then the buyer can do what they want with that, including pay their agent for those fees as part of closing costs. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. And what you need to be doing is explaining that to the buyer during your consult up front. And I'll go a step further. You all should be working way more closely with your lender. You should have a lender that's working with you to lay out how to structure the contract, whether it makes more sense to do a concession, your IPC limits on those concessions, depending upon what type of loan you're looking to do and the price of the property. You should be working very closely with your lender on the different ways that the buyer doesn't have to come out of pocket, so they understand that despite what the mainstream media continues to tell everybody, that this actually hasn't shifted that much. In fact, 16 states across the US already had mandatory buyer rep agreements that were in place before you could write an offer anyway. So there's an education that we as an industry need to be doing. I would encourage everyone to start working more closely with their lender, making sure you're doing seminars, doing Zoom meetings, talking about how buyers, need to operate in this new world, getting rid of the confusion that's occurring with what they're reading in the news, and then explaining to them how this particular process works. That's incredibly crucial right now based upon all of the articles we continue to see in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal and everybody else on that. So
when you think about the buyer's agent, and I think that again, a lot of our members are, and I use the word fearful or scared because it's going to be the new norm, but how do they not lose a potential client to a listing agent? Or if a buyer doesn't want to sign with them when they immediately meet them and they want to, see what else is out there, how does that not just automatically end up going to, I'm going to go see the listing myself, unrepresented, and then
Yeah.
obviously we know you don't have to sign a buyer broker agreement to go tour a home yourself.
Yeah. So great question.
Thoughts
So
around that.
the first thing you need to do is, if you're uncomfortable asking for an exclusive buyer rep, then make it non-exclusive or give it a small amount of time. Make it so that you're working with them for 3 days. I'm making up a number here. And let them get to know you over 3 days. And if they're comfortable with that, then they can sign something closer. Like if a client doesn't want to work with you, then you don't want to be working with them anyway. Like you need to work on establishing that. So you don't have to make it something that they are fearful of. You can say, look, this is the buyer rep agreement. It's exclusive to this particular property. We're looking at this home. If you decide to buy this house, then I'll represent you. If you want to go look at other houses, I don't. There's tons of ways to structure that so that you're removing that objection. Number two, you can explain to them, it's not me doing this. Everybody has to do it. It's required by basically through a settlement through NAR. These are the new rules. Before you can tour a property on the MLS, you have to sign a buyer rep agreement, which is why I made the comment of the fight's going to be on the terms of the rep agreement. Like if you're exclusive for 30 days and everybody else is non-exclusive, you're going to have a harder time getting a buyer to sign that unless you have a good relationship with them. So make it easy and simple and just articulate to them what the reasons are. To your second point, Tiffany, dual agency, I hate it and I'm not shy about it. It is a massive legal risk. I've done the research with providers. Dual agency claims are 15 to 20% higher. The costs will go up. If you get a dual agency claim, likely they will kill your insurance policy, which is going to be a whole new frontier of companies that have not dealt with this. Currently, dual agency is banned in 9 states across the US. I can tell you it's going to increase. It's also what the DOJ is going to look at as well. They don't want to see it that way because inherently you have bias. I know some people are going to argue with me about this and they won't agree. The reality is if you know what a seller is willing to do and you know what a buyer is willing to do, you inherently you are not negotiating on behalf of one individual. It becomes an unfair conversation and you benefit from both sides. That is going to be a massive target in further litigation. Trust me, you're going to see this in the headlines soon. So I don't think that's a good thing to do. And your answer to the buyer is You want to have somebody representing you on your behalf, not representing the seller and now trying to get this thing together to do that. You inherently, dual agency claims end up in court more than non-dual agency claims. It's a fact. So there's that piece. Unrepresented buyer, same thing. Unrepresented buyer, the highest risk of ending up in litigation because they didn't understand the disclosure, they didn't understand what they were signing, they had no idea what was going on in the process, and then they end up buying a house, we had problems, whatever, and then they end up suing everybody. So those are absolutely not fear-based tactics. Those are facts.
Right.
So it's important, what I would tell people is it's important to have somebody representing you, and I would encourage you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, to find the right agent. I hope I'm that person. Let's work together for a week. We'll sign an agreement. We'll do something together for 7 days, 3 days, whatever it is. And if you like working with me, we'll work with each other in a longer, more exclusive capacity. If not, then you're totally fine. Not a difficult conversation to have. You need to articulate that value, but all of those things I said are absolutely important part of the conversation.
Do you think the trend will be more exclusive or non-exclusive?
I think non-exclusive for a while. Because people have never had to do this and they're uncomfortable asking for exclusive. I think good agents will be just fine doing it because they know their worth, they're confident, they have clients. They're like, look, if you want me to dedicate my time to you, I work off an exclusive contract. It could be that, again, we'll try it out for 3 days, but after that, it becomes exclusive. But I do think you'll see this will be non-exclusive for a while until people get their bearings, and then you'll see more of a movement towards that. I mean, why wouldn't you? You don't want to have working with a client that's not committed to work with you. So,
Brandon, I think that even answers I was going to say, Brandon, I think even that answers the question we had last night over the luxury property. And it's a client, a long-standing client, but they don't want to get into something long-term. So maybe, a 3-day agreement sounds a lot more manageable.
Yeah, the thing that scares me most being a broker is that unrepresented buyer. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that because similar to like a for sale by owner, buyers want to do it themselves to save that commission, so to speak. So that's fearful of me. And I think agents can do the most damage to our industry right now on not presenting these buyer agency agreements properly and sticking them in front of people and saying, you can't look at a house until you sign this. That's not the right way to do it. And I think if we go down that path, we're going to make this harder on ourselves all the way through.
I agree. And I'll add some additional things, which will kind of lead this conversation to some extremely important points. Agents that are doing things such as on the buy side, if the seller is not offering compensation, I want to be very clear about this to everybody because there's a new lawsuit today already out for this very thing. If you are steering people away from homes that are not offering compensation in advance of an offer, you are steering. It's against the law. Like, it's also a code of ethics violation. So you need to be extraordinarily mindful about things such as if your brokerage is having you sign or having your buyer sign a document that states they won't be shown houses that are not offering compensation, run. Like, get out of that immediately because that is absolutely going to end up in litigation. And I guarantee you, as somebody who's currently in litigation in these class action cases, which most people have been fortunate enough not to be part of, it's not fun. The cost of litigation will bankrupt your business unless you have a lot of money or a big entity like ours. So be very mindful about what your fiduciary duty is. I think this is going to lead to a few things. Every single listing is something you can write an offer on. Whether the seller is offering compensation or not, it is irrelevant. Mm-hmm. The reason it is irrelevant is because you have a duty to show a property and to, if the buyer wants to write an offer, then do it. If the buyer can't pay your fee and they've told you that, then your answer is, let's put it in the offer or we'll ask the seller for a concession. It's a negotiation. Here's what I can tell you. Sellers want to sell houses. That hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. They want to get a house sold. So it becomes part of the negotiation in that particular process. I also can tell you I have a podcast coming out next week. It'll be probably one of the craziest podcasts we've done. Brokers stopped offering compensation in November of last year after the verdict. We go through great detail on this. He basically said, so everybody hears these words, seller is willing to entertain any and all requests, put it in your offer. The seller isn't saying they aren't offering compensation. They're simply saying, tell us what you need and we'll work on figuring out how to put a deal together. In all of those situations where the deal needed to come together, the buyer either paid their buyer agent because they had the funds to do so, or guess what? The seller paid the fee because they wanted to sell their house. Your job is to have a buyer look at property and negotiate to make that come together. And I guarantee you, 99% of the time, the seller is going to figure out a way to get their home sold because they're not doing this for their health, right? They need to make this happen. Brandon, I would love to shift to some of these conversations on the sell side about this if we can, because I think it's relevant.
Yep.
So when you're having a conversation with a seller, this is the scripting for this. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is my fee. This is what I charge. This is what I do, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And the seller goes, I don't want to offer any compensation to the buyer's agent because I read the lawsuit and I read the settlement and they can pay their own fee. Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, totally an option for you. Here's what I would like to do. I would like to advertise that the seller is willing to entertain any and all requests and to put in the offer. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is I'm not saying you're going to pay compensation. I'm not saying anything. I just want to bring as many offers in as possible because that's my job. And then we're going to look at those offers and then we're going to determine what we want to counter on, whether we want to accept it, what we want to do as a strategy. Because Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's the key point. Ready? What you care most about is the net, correct? Yes. Right. All right. I'm going to give you an example on why I want to do this strategy. Number one, if we had an all cash offer at asking price and that offer also said they'll pay their buyer's agent fee, is that a great offer? And the seller will instinctually say, yes. Great. I had a second offer come across. It was $100,000 over asking, and it's asking you to pay the buyer's agent's fee because the buyer can't afford it. So they can finance that in the loan, but you make an extra $50,000 on that deal. Is that a good offer? And they go, yeah. So see why I want to make sure we're getting all the offers in, because it doesn't really matter. What we're going to look at is net. That's what you care about. I can tell you 100% of the time, the scripting like that, the seller goes, makes sense. So the listing agent's job is to state, we want to receive everything. And the buyer's agent's job is to tell a buyer, we'll look at every property, we'll write an offer on every property. And it's my job to figure out how to make a deal come together. And in the case of if you can't pay my fee on your own, we'll put that in the contract, we'll make it part of the process, and then we'll figure out what those steps are. Now, I'm going to add a really interesting comment to this, which is going to get everybody thinking. So, fiduciary duty on the sell side. If in the last model that we had where we were sharing of compensation, we were collecting and remitting to the buyer broker, which you shouldn't be doing any further, to be clear. I'll come back to that. That was a different model. In this new model where the buyer agent sits down with the buyer, this is going to like mind warp everybody for a second, where the buyer agent sits down with the buyer and agrees to a rate of compensation that we can all agree will vary. Buyer agent that's really good, that's been doing it a long time, will have some type of rate, and maybe somebody newer has some type of lower rate, whatever that is, okay? I would argue that if you are offering compensation in advance of an offer, that you might be breaching your fiduciary duty. And the reason I say that is if, let's say that there was an offer that came across and it was a new agent and they were charging a lot less money to represent that buyer, and you were advertising in advance of an offer, let's say a concession rate that was double the rate of what that agent was charging the buyer, you might have just left money on the table for the seller. Like you literally might have just screwed the seller out of money. And
Brandon,
so what I'm
you've been saying that's what you've been saying, I think, this last several weeks as well.
I agree 100%.
It's logical.
Because they can amend that. Yeah, they can amend that buyer's agreement, knowing what you're offering, and then come in and you just cost your seller money.
And or you just told the buyer's agent what to request in the offer. So if the thing is, you don't know what the buyer and the buyer agent agreed to. Nobody has any idea what that is. And so if you don't know what that is in advance of an offer, you're putting your cards on the table first. Your seller could go, oh, wow, if they found out that you didn't need to do even half that amount to close a deal, there's your claim. And so what I'm trying to make a point of is this, and this is where I genuinely believe this is going to go in time. It's going to be a real painful process getting there. It's really this simple. Put a property on the market, tell your seller that you need to be open to any and all requests, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do once we get the offers. And as a buyer's agent, you go, any property for sale, we're going to write an offer on, and we're going to figure out how to make the terms work so that it is what you want. I don't care if the seller says sold as is, means nothing to me as a buyer's agent. I'm literally going to go, what does my buyer want? They want the couch, they want the furniture, they want the spa in the backyard, and we're going to put it in the offer and it becomes a negotiation. It's that basic. That is where we will go in the future.
So we know you've been on the front lines of all of these discussions, and a lot of the questions we've gotten have to do with workarounds. Like, and I think you're giving our members like very clear pathways of how to articulate your value. But if for those that still want to think about a workaround, what do you say? Because again, I know you feel strongly about this as well.
Look, I'm only going to repeat as somebody who's directly involved in these cases. So take my word different than anybody who's not been sued. The plaintiff's lawyers are very clear about what they want. They do not want propping up of compensation. They view sharing of commissions as propping up compensation. I understand that you can do it still in the NAR carve out. I get it. I've read it. I'm involved in all of it. The reality is you don't need to share commissions because you can advertise, just to be clear, if you wanted to advertise that the seller is willing to pay X to the buyer's agent, you can do that. I just gave you a reason why I don't think you should, but that doesn't mean you can't. You can continue to do that. Just don't collect the money and remit it to the buyer broker. That's why EXP is not doing it. That's why Real's not doing it. That's why we're not doing it. That's why companies all over the US are going, we're not sharing anymore, because you can just have the buyer's agent get paid through the closing process. The seller pays it direct. There's no tie of propping up. Workarounds of shared websites where you've got all these different competing companies sharing compensation on there, a really bad idea. They have been crystal clear they do not want that. And I know some of you probably feel the same way. Look, I do too. Like, screw the DOJ, screw the lawyers, you know, they were wrong, blah, 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 blah. That's fine. You're entitled to those feelings. But the reality is, if you get named in one of these cases, you will spend $100,000 a month in legal fees defending it. And it will take years to get to trial, which means you'll settle or you'll file bankruptcy. Those are the two choices. That's how the legal system in this country is built. They can sue for anything. You have to hire a lawyer to defend you, and then it goes through the process. It makes no sense to do workarounds. You're just asking to be named in one of these cases, and you do not want to do that as somebody who's involved. It's not fun. There's nothing fun about it. So follow the process, skate to where the puck is going to be, and you're going to be just fine. That whole process I just told you is about as basic as it gets, and it keeps you out of hot water.
Mm-hmm. Brandon, do you have anything else before we wrap up?
And I do, but it's something that I think would really open a big conversation. But what do you, and we'll just try to keep it simple. Do you still see value in associations? Because a lot of members think that the value in the association was the MLS and the compensation, which I disagree with. But what are your thoughts?
I do. Look, I think that there's going to be a lot of changes in the world of MLSs and associations, but I will say this: I have been both critical and an advocate for the National Association of Realtors. I'm not shy about the things I think they're not doing right, but I'm also not shy about the things that they are very important. I will state a few things for everybody to understand about associations. The primary thing, one of the most important parts of your association is advocacy. And I don't even like that word. Somebody even knows what that means. It's basically figuring out how to get politicians to not write stupid bills that destroy residential real estate. I'll simplify it that way. And it's influencing their decision-making process to make sure that they are putting things out that are pro home ownership, that are pro being able to buy a house, generating wealth, because real estate is 20% of our GDP. Your association, local, state, and national, does that better than almost any other organization in the United States. For example, if NAR wasn't here, your 1099 status would go away. I'll make this really simple for everybody. If you were not a 1099 status agent, and you had to be a W-2 based agent where the brokerage had to pay you a minimum wage and put you on healthcare and all of that stuff, the number of agents in the industry would shrink by about 60 to 70% because there's no way brokerages could afford to employ everybody. The only reason we have a 1099 status is because NAR advocates that every year, and it's always on the chopping block, whether it's Republican or Democrat administration. They're trying to figure out how to increase taxes.
Statewide also, every year, independent contractor.
Statewide also, in California, like all the things that happen to influence the politicians to do things or not do things that affect the industry. I fear that people will go, I'm so mad at NAR. I'm so mad at my association. I don't want to spend the money. I'm like, that is a drop in the bucket for what would happen if we didn't have that kind of advocacy effort. So educate yourself on what it is that your association does. If you don't need the training, fine. But I'm happily would pay double the fees that I pay to make sure that somebody is there continuing to make sure our industry is able to do what it does. That is extraordinarily important because if we lose our advocacy power, I promise you this industry will not look the same. It just will not.
Absolutely. Thanks, James. And where can our listeners find you? Again, I know that Brandon and I listen to your podcast and as a guest on other podcasts, but where can our listeners come to hear straight from
so it's simple. It's just Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered is the podcast. You can get it on Apple, Spotify. You can watch our YouTube channel, which is where most people go. And we bring on really known industry people to come talk to us. We had Nakia Wright on there last week to talk about her new, what her role as a CEO at NAR. So it's a fun place to be, and you'll learn a lot about what's happening in the business there. So
thanks, James. Can you leave our listeners with one last piece of advice?
I'm going to use this analogy of skate to where the puck is going to be. Stop trying to figure out how to do things the way it's always been. Just look at the cards and go, okay, this is where we need to go. How do I change my business to be there? How do I create this experience for my buyers and sellers that's better than my competition? They will pay you. They will pay you. You just need to articulate your value. It's just that. They will pay you. Every single study I've seen and read and every single thing I'm looking at shows they are willing to pay a premium for convenience and service. You just need to show them that you're the person to do that, and you're going to be just fine. So,
well, thank you, Brandon. Anything else?
I just say thanks again. No, this was great information. Time flew. I think I could talk to you for hours.
I talk a lot.
We'd love to have you back on because we only got through a few of our questions. So
I'm happy to come back on. Just let me know place and time. So
okay, thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.